Yes, Teresa, you can go ahead and record it. We usually record these trainings as well, so you'll get that link from me too. So, okay. So starting off about why we're interested in policing issues, I said earlier that my name is Jennifer Wagoner. I go by JW because there's a lot of Jennies. I use the pronouns she or they, and I live in San Francisco, California, on the border between the Park District and the Mission District, which is how San Francisco is divided up for policing. And I'm interested in policing issues in part because San Francisco has a horrible history, and a lot of particularly white people in San Francisco don't realize that when it comes to policing. We were investigated by the federal government, by a grand jury, and by a blue ribbon panel, and found to have significant issues. At one point in time, we averaged 4 people, excuse me, 7 people being murdered a quarter. It has improved significantly. There are not as many people dying at the hands of police, but there's still a lot of significant problems, particularly with bias and use of force. So I got involved with policing because I wanted to increase transparency and accountability. It's part of the League belief that if everyone participates, together we can come to solutions, that democracy is stronger when everyone is involved. And one of the big problems with policing is that a lot of people are not involved in defining what safety is, whether there should be police, if there are police, what they're responsible for, what policies and procedures they have to follow. I'm curious, is there anyone else who wants to share why they're interested in policing issues? If you could say something in the chat, we could go ahead and unmute you. I'm curious, maybe calling on Denise. Do you want to say something about that? Denise, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Okay.
Why are you interested in policing issues?
I just found out about this on the call with the chapter, and I'm pretty new to being involved with the group, but yeah, obviously this is a really hot topic right now, so it seemed really timely. And since a lot of these meetings are taking place remotely too, it seems like it would just be interesting to learn more about how that works and what I can do to help out and just be more informed.
Great, great. And have you attended any policing issues so far?
No, I haven't.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jen Wong, can I call on you to share a little bit about why you're interested in policing issues, where you live and work, pronouns you use, all that good stuff? And Jen, we're not hearing you yet. Nope, it's still not working. All right, well, while you're figuring out, it says you're unmuted, but we can't hear you right now, so you'll try rejoining, okay? I see Peter here put into the chat that he's interested in defunding the police and reallocating the funds to services that would improve people's lives and prevent rather than respond to or create crime. Defunding the police is a huge topic, and it's been really interesting hearing people call into police commission meetings to talk about exactly how that's going to happen. So that's definitely something that we're hearing from a lot of people joining these trainings right now. I see Laura Davis has put into the chat that she's from Chicago, and they have a lot of gun violence and very bad behavior by police. There's no trust, and the police culture is very bad. It sounds similar to issues that we've had here in San Francisco and sadly in many departments across the country. So clearly policing is a very serious problem. It's a life and death issue. It not only is life and death for the officers, but also for community members. So I just want to respect that many people feel very passionately about this for good reason. And so doing these trainings so that people feel empowered to get involved with defining who the police are and what they do and whether they exist is part of what we want to have happen here. So I want everyone to feel welcome to talk about how they feel about these issues. So what is observing like? I know that we've had some people say that they have observed public meetings before. I was talking to Peter a little bit before the call and how he has observed meetings. I'm curious, Peter, if I can unmute you, if you could share a little bit about what that has been like for you. And I apologize, my registrations are jumping around a little bit, but now you should be unmuted. What has observing public meetings been like for you?
It's really interesting and inspiring, especially when you get into sort of the moment to moment of people making public comments and making points, bringing up issues, bringing up facts that that you subsequently hear the politicians or the people on the commission or whoever bring up. When you hear that reflected back, you know that you've been heard, you know that they're paying attention, and you know that your presence and your contribution is having an effect. And that to me, like, is kind of democracy in practical action.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful description. Have there been any meetings that you haven't liked attending that were frustrating or boring or?
Usually it's just like the worst case scenario usually is just they're already they've already made up their minds and they're just going to do what they're going to do. At the same time, when you are already in alignment with what they're going to do and they need public support for what they actually want to do,
mm-hmm.
then like you are giving them courage, you're giving them support, you're giving them talking points and ammunition, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and you're actively helping them do what they want to do. So yeah, I would say boring is usually the worst case. I haven't been in one where it's been frustrating, and just keeping in mind I live in San Francisco, so like I know there have been other public meetings elsewhere that have been much more adversarial or even devolving into fights. But yeah, usually like the worst case that I've experienced has just been like everything gets continued, nothing happens, nothing really gets done, and that all you can really do about that is just keep showing up and keep the pressure on.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for sharing that, Peter. I'm going to try unmuting you again, Jen, to see if that works.
Sure.
Jen, are you
Can you
there?
hear me now?
Yeah, there you are.
Awesome.
So we're on to the question about what observing a public meeting has been like. So if you could maybe introduce yourself and dive into that question.
Sure. So I'm Jennifer Wong. I go by Jen or Jenzor or Jen Wong to differentiate all the Jens. My pronouns are she, her. I live in the Richmond district in San Francisco, and I co-lead the Observer Corps in San Francisco with JW. So I can talk a little bit about yesterday's meeting. So we observed the police commission meeting last night, which went from 5:30 p.m. to about 10:45 p.m. I actually missed the beginning of the meeting, but popped in around the chief's report. So it has been actually a very interesting meeting recently because it's been extremely contentious, but it's also super interesting to see the commissioners because I think they're all very fired up to actually make a difference. Whereas before, a lot of these meetings tended to be more kind of neutral, very, political, very pleasant, without actually making any significant changes. And now I feel like they're really fired up. They're getting into arguments with each other. Everyone's a little bit cranky, I think, from being inside. And so I'd say this meeting in particular has been really interesting, and it's a very different dynamic seeing it online versus in person, because I think there's a level of decorum that happens when you're in person that you don't have when you're just speaking to someone virtually because they are not in their presence. So I will say, yeah, I agree with Peter, what he said about the worst case scenario is that it's very boring. It's a lot about the legislation. There are a lot of acronyms that don't make sense. And so it's often nice to be attending with other people.
Great. So I definitely think that things have changed a lot since we're meeting remotely. So I'm glad that you brought that up. In the National League of Women Voters issued a statement about best practices for remote meetings right now. And the League in California revised that document And then the San Francisco League actually used that to demand that the police commission start meeting again because they had stopped meeting and were using the pandemic as an excuse. They were able to meet online. We knew they could meet online, and now they're meeting online. But if your local league or your community is not having online meetings at all, or the online meetings are not very good, I want you to know that there are league resources out there for you that could be helpful, because it definitely made a big difference here in San Francisco. And we have seen our comments have an impact. So if we say, you know, it's confusing how they're explaining the public call-in works, or that people would like to see all of the committee members all at once, which they still haven't managed to do, but they have heard that complaint at least. The city has been responsive. So I think that getting meetings going remotely and then making them so that they're a better experience for the public is something that the league can really focus on, and that community members can expect of their government right now. So the key thing about our trainings that might be different from other places' trainings is that we train the public mostly. It's not exclusively for league members. We do have a lot of league members participate, but we didn't want there to be any barriers. Policing in particular needed more people from all walks of life showing up at those meetings. And to be honest, the typical league member is generally wealthier, more educated, you know, majority female. It depends on the area that you're in, but can be majority white. Our league actually trends a lot younger than many leagues, but it can be older. And so we chose to encourage the public to attend because we really thought that that was more important than just league members attending. All right, so I'm just checking, I heard a message pop up, but it looks good. So let's go into the materials of the training. So the first thing I want to show you is our job description. And in our training, this is what we would be talking about now. So what is an observer? For us, we have both a general public observer and then we have an official league observer. And we've made that distinction because we really want the public to observe meetings. So this is a job description for the general public observer. They don't have to be a league member. They aren't overseen by us. All sorts of stuff can go on if you're a public person observing a meeting. So you don't have to take this training. All you have to do is show up at a meeting that is a public meeting and you're an observer. You don't have to be an expert. There are no standards that you have to meet. You can see part of a meeting. You could watch all of a meeting. You could decide only go to one meeting and never go again. You could decide to go to different meetings. San Francisco has all of these districts. You could go to different districts around the city. You could go just to your district. We do recommend, if they're available in person, that you go, but of course right now that's not possible. And we strongly recommend that you go with other people. It's a lot more fun because you get to see your friend. Jen and I used to go to the meetings in City Hall, and it was really fun to look forward to seeing her there. And then we would usually chit chat about what was happening. Now that we're meeting online, we often have 5 or 6, or sometimes even as many as like 8 or 9 people all in a chat group talking about what's happening in the meeting and live tweeting it. And it ends up feeling really fun to see your friends and to be able to ask questions. So for example, last night, I couldn't find a particular document and someone else found it for me. And then Jen was asking, well, I found these reports and these reports. And I said, no, here's that report's answer. And then someone that we haven't ever done a training with said, well, here I am on Twitter, let me share what I'm saying. So as you connect to other people, it can actually be really fun to see what other people's observations and resources are. For leagues, they often set very high standards for their observers. And we just want to encourage you to consider that you could have these 2 different classes so that more people could participate. It also has been a great way to take the pressure off. When we talk to other leagues that have observer corps, the high standards often drove people away. And so you might want to have a range of rules so that if there's someone who maybe doesn't want to take exhaustive notes, or if there's someone who doesn't want to go to every single meeting, or someone who doesn't want to go to the entire meeting, especially if they're lasting 5, 6, 7 hours like our meetings in San Francisco, they still have a role because their life may change and they may become your best observer. There's a great example of a woman named Catherine here in San Francisco who was a great observer, but then her life changed and she had a new job and we didn't hear from her for about a year. And she's back again and she's back to being one of our best observers. And because we told her, you know, we'll take what you've got, like don't feel like there's these incredible standards that you have to meet. You know, we encourage everyone, if they want to file a report with us, they can, whether they're an official observer or not. Once someone is serious about it and they feel like they want to do more, they can learn about how the body works. And again, this is part of how having friends who are also observing can be really great, because they might be able to tell you some of the background, or they caught a reference that you missed, or they know what a particular acronym means. They can also refer you to different websites and to different reports assessing, for example, the San Francisco Police Department, because there's a lot of people assessing our police department right now, and it's neat to hear about those reports. You can learn more about the issues covered by the government in the meetings. So the League is planning to offer statewide trainings coming up, and likely national trainings around key issues around use of force, militarization, bias in policing, and other topics. There are lots of other organizations that offer trainings right now too. You can tell people about what the government is doing. You can tweet about it. You can talk about it with your friends. You could write an article about it, but you don't have to do that. You know, these are optional things. One of the fun things about going in person is that you actually get to meet these government officials, the members of the media who are there, the community groups, and your neighbors. But I'm meeting different people in the online versions. And so you still get to meet people even when it's remote. And some of the commissioners have actually been paying more attention to who is live tweeting, who is posting things to Facebook, who has Instagram posts. And so we're getting to know the commissioners a little bit better now, because you know, we've got their attention if we're posting things to the internet. And of course, you can get more involved if you're a general member of the public by asking questions and providing comments. And people can even apply to serve on the police commission. There's several vacancies right now. And one of the things the League does is encourage people to run for bodies. So if you're interested in how you would get onto a police commission or the Sunshine Task Force or other groups, that's one of the things that you could get into once you've observed them a few times. So this job description is very basic. Many leagues have much more complicated job descriptions, but we do not. We really want to keep it simple. When someone is going to go and observe, we use a checklist. Oops, I just brought up the wrong tab. There we go. So this checklist is pretty easy. And again, we don't want people to be overwhelmed. So before you go, you have to confirm the meeting time, date, and location. In San Francisco, they had an issue last night where they put the wrong phone number in part of their agenda. It was one number off. So fortunately, they had it listed in 2 places and everybody was able to share. If you want to call in, don't use the wrong number, use the right number. But, you know, people are humans and they make mistakes, and particularly for the in-person meetings, we had a lot of problems with police changing meetings times and locations, and it was very difficult to keep track of where they were going to be and when. Optionally beforehand, you can learn about the body, but you can show up really not knowing very much about the body at all. And we want to encourage people to just go and see what it's like. My biggest concern is that people are intimidated. They're afraid. Many of the meetings in San Francisco are either held in City Hall or in police district buildings. And those are very intimidating to many people. So just getting yourself in the door and showing up is actually a really, commendable thing to have done. Lots of people won't do it. During the meeting, you can introduce yourself to the body and to the people who are attending. You can't really do that with the software that San Francisco's Police Commission is using right now. But if you were in person, you would have the option of doing that. We encourage observers to pay attention, but the League's research says that you don't have to pay attention and you are still improving the functioning of government. They have found that if someone just shows up at a meeting in person or virtually, the government feels like someone is watching and they are on better behavior because of that. So part of why, again, we have such a low bar for someone becoming an observer, why we don't create barriers, is that even if they were to log in to the online meeting and go make dinner, they're not even in the same room, the government still improves its behavior because that's one more person that they feel is watching. So don't discourage people from going even if they're not paying attention the whole time, it is still valuable to have essentially a warm body that's logged into that software, that's shown up in the room. Encourage them to do it. It's optional to take notes. It's optional to think about our report questions. It's optional to post to social media. These are all fun and interesting things if you want to do them, but we don't require our observers to do it. And then after, everything is optional. You're not required to submit a report to us, but we would like you to. And we've made it as short as possible. We look it over and we discuss it with you if we have any questions. And if you want, we would love to put it up on our website. If you don't want it to go on the website, it doesn't go on the website. We may talk about it if you've said something that's interesting that we should pass on to our advocacy team in case they want to make a request of the police commission or the police department or the mayor. But you don't have to submit a report to us. It's not required. You can put your own report online, and we've been using the hashtags We Are Watching in San Francisco along with some others. And you can send your report to the body. We've experimented over time with sending the reports to the bodies, and what we found is that we were working on putting together sort of a summary where we said, here are a bunch of things that we've been observing about in-person meetings. Here are some recommendations we would like to make to you, but then the pandemic happened, and so we didn't submit that report. And instead, we focused on best practices for online meetings. If you want to share your report with the body, they actually would probably be really interested to get that. They don't get as much input as you would think. Our commissioner said that a couple of times recently, they've gotten thousands of messages, but even at this time when it's much more heightened, we're not having a lot of submissions. Keep in mind, though, that if you do submit something, usually the government is required to make that public, and so other people will see it. So don't consider that letter private if you do decide to submit your report. So our checklist is very short. There's really only 2 things that we ask people to do, and paying attention is not actually a firm requirement. We just want them to be there. So this report, how do we do it? Again, the report is optional, so if you don't want to file it, you don't have to do it. It is online, and we created it using a Google form, and it has a short link, so it's easy for people to find. But most of it is very basic logistical questions. So your email, your name, are you a member of the public or an official league observer, the date of the meeting, the location, what the meeting was, did you attend the whole thing? And then the only really substantial questions are the last 3. So tell us about public input. Did it happen? How was it conducted? Did it seem adequate? Our focus here on San Francisco is transparency and accountability and having more people watching public meetings. So public input is really important. That's one very specific question that we asked. Then we asked, tell us about the government. Who was there? Were they attentive? Were they prepared? Were they courteous with each other and the public? Again, we're really focused on what the public experience is of the meeting. And back when we were doing district meetings, we had been asked both by community groups and by the SFPD themselves, as well as some of the local politicians, to see how these meetings were going. Because even though a standard has been set top down, that doesn't necessarily mean that the meetings are being well run once you actually show up at them. And we found a lot of variety. So it was helpful to find out, for example, that the police department had set up sort of a speakers bureau or a talking circuit where they would invite one person to talk at one district, and then that person would go on tour, and you would see them at every single district talking about the same thing. So for example, the DA's office took out a presentation and told everyone about exactly how stay-away orders work, and they gave that presentation at every district. Another one that they did was San Francisco General Hospital wanted to learn more about people's thoughts on head trauma. So they did presentations in the districts near San Francisco General Hospital and then expanded to the whole city to get input. It was interesting to learn that they had this speaker series because they didn't tell you that if you went to one of the meetings. So knowing who is there from the government and what they're doing was a really great question for us to ask. And then the final question is, do you want to tell us anything else? We don't ask people to keep detailed minutes, records of the votes. That's more than most people want to have to put into their report. And we have found that that's not necessarily the most useful information for what we're trying to accomplish. Now, admittedly, as our advocacy team has gotten more involved, they have asked specific questions and we've had conversations about particular issues. So for example, we have a League of Women Voters of San Francisco member who has served on the use of force working group. We have communicated with her and fellow advocacy folks around exactly how some of those conversations have gone, and have even given feedback to her when her name has come up in commission meetings and how people have talked about her and who has said things about her and recommended that she meet with certain commissioners and not other commissioners. So we can get into detail once we get to know each other pretty well and know that there's certain things that we're looking for. But for a general observer report, we just want them to show up. You know, what we found is that if someone starts going to these meetings, within a couple of months, they really want to get more involved. And the other thing we found is that there are a lot of people who want to get involved with policing who don't really know what they're talking about. And so going to a meeting and sitting and taking notes is a really good way for them to start to see some of the trends and have some of their assumptions challenged. We've even had a few people who felt like they were in a tight spot. For example, there was a guy that I met at a Showing Up for Racial Justice meeting who came up to me and said, you know, many of my family members are cops. I'm really starting to question how policing is done in San Francisco, but I don't feel like I can speak openly with them about that they would be very upset if I did. Becoming an observer really is wonderful because what you do is you look at what do the police say they're going to do? What are the oversight bodies? Where does the public have input and what's being said there? And it's a really nice way to get a really big overview of what's happening in the city, what some of the issues are. And you quickly notice, you know, back when we were having district meetings, that there were some communities that were mostly younger Latino multifamily renters, and that was not who was showing up at the police meetings. And so you start to think, well, why is it mostly older, white, very educated homeowners that are here? What sort of information do the police get if these are the only people who are showing up for their meetings? So it gave us some ideas about how we could help observers ease into the topic and do as little harm as possible so that someone who's really eager to get more involved has a chance to meet other people, talk to them about their experiences, get more engaged before they start really pushing for advocacy based on their own life experiences versus what it may what the larger community may want and need. So Jen, I feel like I've been talking for a while. Is there anything in the chat or any of the comments that you want to bring up at this point?
Sure. There were some pretty interesting questions around how to like write to the body, the government body, or how to like contact them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's actually hard. Here in San Francisco, our government websites are really inconsistent. The SFPD did update their website about a year ago, and it got much better. Part of why we have the FAQ is that it used to be almost impossible to get all the contact information for our local districts. So each of these districts have a phone number and a Twitter handle. The Department of Police Accountability has a website and a form that you can fill in. What's interesting is that most people who are either working for or serving in an official position in San Francisco government have an email generated for them, which is their first name dot last name at sfgov. But that doesn't always work super well, and the police commissioners don't have their emails on the website. So we've worked pretty hard to get those emails. SFPD now is much better about putting the contact information of their officers in the district newsletters. So if you go to the SFPD website and you look up your district, there's a newsletter there that's a PDF. And if you find the PDF, often in that has contact information. But governments are really bad about providing their contact information. And here in San Francisco, there are fairly regular changes in staffing so that the command staff of districts are moved around. And as people get more training and move through certifications, they also sometimes change their roles. So finding that contact information is one of the big services that the League can provide. And that's part of why we've tried to do things like these FAQs so people can figure out how to contact their own government. Are there other questions in there, Jen, that you want to go over?
I'm actually curious, let's see. It was, I think Lindsay Baker commented that she was the only person observing the city council meeting where she's based, I think Santa Barbara. I don't know,
Wow.
Lindsay, if you'd like to share what that was like.
And Jen, are you able to unmute people, or do you need me to jump in and do that?
I think I can unmute myself.
Yep, we can hear you.
Good. Yes, I was in the city council meeting, and I was the only one there, and a city council member said to me, "I'm so glad you're here," because it made them feel like there was somebody who was interested in what they were presenting. I'm not here because of the police issue. I observe the Santa Barbara City Council, the Water Commission, and the Planning Commission, and occasionally the County Board of Supervisors. So that's has been my focus, and I'm there for specific issues that are concerning our Social Policy Committee and our Sustainable Communities Committee, which deals with housing issues. And so I'm there for those issues, those specific issues.
Mm-hmm. So do you work pretty closely with advocacy? Are you considered even part of advocacy within your league?
Yes, I was the co-president for 4 years, and advocacy was my area. So yes, I spoke for the league to the governing bodies. Now I'm just an observer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's an interesting nuance within the league. When people move on to becoming official observers, we're not allowed to speak in the name of the league. No one who attends this training is allowed to speak in the name of the league. Instead, you'd be speaking as yourself. And so if you're going as a general member of the public, you can always decide to do public comment, and there's usually information about how to do that or a particular process for how to do it. But if you're an official league observer, we really have you there specifically to observe. And so we tend to separate out, if someone's going to speak, there's someone from our advocacy committee, not from our observer corps. But we've talked about changing that, because there are other leagues that they don't necessarily have such strict boundaries. So as long as an observer has had authority granted to them by the committee, by the board, by the president, then they're allowed to speak. So there's a lot of different ways that leagues choose to run this. And in our case, we really want the observers to not speak on behalf of the league, because we want people to be able to participate early on. And usually if you haven't been a league member for very long, you don't know enough about the rules. And there's a lot of rules about when you can or can't speak and what you can speak about. So it's been easier just to tell people, if you want to speak, don't be a league observer. We'd still love to have you join our chat groups, and we'll help you speak on your own. Don't use the league name. But if you want to be an official observer, we're going to ask you to not speak at the meetings. So that's one of the things that I think is really interesting when we hear from different leagues like Santa Barbara, where you've closely tied it to your advocacy work with experienced people, and yet now you're just an observer, you're not speaking. There's this whole path of whether someone can speak or not, and what that means. And I see Jen has been posting information into the chat here. Jen, is there anyone else that you think that we should call on who could maybe share a story about what they're interested in or their observer experiences?
I haven't seen anything specific, but if anyone would like to weigh in, I see a bit of chatter that's happening, but I don't know if anyone wants to share anything specific about their experiences.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll go and show people a little bit more about the report, and if someone speaks up in chat, then you can go ahead and call on them. So in San Francisco, we have a website which is sort of the general introduction to policing. And that here has all the documents that I've been using in the training tonight. So if you go to that webpage, at the top, we have an event coming up where we're interviewing the Department of Police Accountability's director. We have ongoing trainings, and then you come down to here, And we have these documents that I've shared. So the FAQ, the observer job description, the training agenda, the checklist, and the observer report. And I'll also be sending those out in an email after this training, so don't feel like you have to frantically download them right now. But I just wanted you to see how our league puts those out there so that anybody who wants to use them can use them. They don't have to go to this training in order to see it. And we have the past observer reports online. And I'm not going to say that we 100% without question recommend doing this. Part of why we have a separate website on Medium is because our own local league website is a little difficult to maintain. And the person who was responsible for it didn't want to get overwhelmed with observer reports. So we created a Medium site because Jen and I can maintain it ourselves, and the observers can create a Medium account and even submit their own reports. So one of the limitations of Medium is that it only lets you have a couple of tabs. So if we wanted to feature all of the districts in San Francisco, we can't do it. We only get this many tabs. So for example, these are older reports because we haven't met in person in a while, but this is a report for the Bayview Police Station. More recently, we have a lot of police commission reports. And so each of the reports are uploaded. And so here's Catherine's report. And if you click on her report, it says that she is an official league observer and that she participated via Zoom. She says that she went to the police commission meeting. Let me get this out of the way. That she did not attend the whole meeting. She says that there was a technical issue so that the queue for people to speak got dropped off. That's not good. And then she told us a lot about the government, who was there and who participated. And she didn't tell us anything else. There was nothing else she wanted to share. So it's helpful for us to have these reports because we can look back at what's happened over time, but we've also had other organizations contact us. So for example, one group that's very focused on defunding the police got in touch with us and said, you know, we're thinking about attending this meeting. This is why. Would it be helpful? And we said, well, you know, that's not really what these meetings are for. You probably want to be able to talk to the mayor and the board of supervisors. And so other groups will sometimes come and ask to learn from our observers. What have our experiences been? How are things going? What could we be doing differently to be more effective? And we've had members of the police commission also ask us about some of our reports, where they've said that they didn't realize that they were sometimes failing to post documents in a timely way. And it was reassuring to me to hear last night them say that they knew that they had received some documents in time, but they didn't get posted to their website on Friday night like they should have. And so the public did not have the benefit of reviewing those documents in advance. So we do have an impact by having these reports up there. But again, our focus is getting people to go. It's not as much on the reporting. We're not trying to be the court reporter. You know, we're not the scribe for this body. They do have their own minutes. And so the minutes are there if people want them. So I see that there is a question coming up. What's this in the?
Yeah, so Sam has a question or a concern. And it is that, so they say, I was a school board member in the past, so I understand how the meetings work, but I'm overwhelmed with the idea of learning enough about police and municipal operations to determine what policing issues we have in their area and what the options are to push for change.
Well, I'd be curious to hear what you would say to this too, Jen. I mean, my response would be is that our police commissioners don't know everything about policing issues and the municipal operations, but they're still commissioners. It's overwhelming. There are people who are academics, who have PhDs, who are hired by our police commission to consult, and it's a huge issue. So maybe thinking of it not so much as you needing to be fully informed in everything in all ways, and instead pick the areas where you feel your experience and knowledge is most relevant. You know, when I first started, the only thing that I really cared about was that I was annoyed that only at the police meetings did they tell people that you had to silence your cell phones and that you had to put them in airplane mode and that you weren't allowed to text or tweet or anything, because I knew that was not true. They said that the cell phones would interfere with the sound system, and it wasn't right. That wasn't a big issue, but it was actually pretty important because it was keeping people from being able to live tweet and communicate with people in the physical meeting room and the people outside of the meeting room. I knew enough about that to be kind of concerned about it. But also, I'm a member of the public. And the idea is that government is supposed to be transparent and accountable enough that if I start watching these meetings and I don't know what an acronym is, it's appropriate for me to ask them to explain it. If they have a report where I don't understand what the report is telling me, it's appropriate for me to ask them to explain it. I think because you've been a board member, your expectation of yourself is as if you're on the body and responsible for all of it. You're not. You're a member of the public who's coming in and helping look at what are some of the issues that I could approach. Is it something that you have personal knowledge and experience in? Maybe it's that you know a lot about procedure and you know that they're not properly agendizing items and that that's something that inhibits the ability of the public to participate. We regularly with our observers talk about how people have different perspectives on what bodies should be doing and how they should do it and whether those rules really help or hinder, whether people are playing a game and it's just a way to manipulate involvement or whether it really is a way to facilitate participation so more people can be there. And since you've been a school board member, you probably understand that. So again, I would encourage you to just maybe not put so much pressure on yourself to know and be all things and focus just on the areas that are more within what your interest and expertise is in. In particular, and I don't think I've talked about this enough, policing often hears a lot from older white women. And I'm not making a presumption about who you are or what your involvement is, but I know for me, I have really tried not to necessarily come in expressing my opinion and my expertise. I've really focused on, well, who's not in this room? Who's not being able to attend? Who's not represented? I mean, one of the things that I've really noticed is that 90% of the local police district meetings are about people who do not have housing. And there's almost never anyone in that meeting who does not have housing. It was really striking to me that there was a gentleman who is an advocate for folks who are living in SROs in the mission who would come to those meetings. And I really wanted more people from his perspective to come, because if we were going to spend almost the entire meeting talking about what people who didn't have a house in San Francisco needed and how their neighbors were going to respond to them, it was grossly inappropriate that none of them were there and there were no advocates there. Yes, SRO is single resident occupancy housing here in San Francisco, transitional. So before I would go to a meeting and start expressing my opinion, I would really want to sit and listen. And that's part of the design of the San Francisco Observer Corps, is to encourage people to sit and see who's there and see who's not there and learn more about the issues before I decide that I should be speaking on behalf of my personal interests. So have we had any challenges about deciding to post observer reports? Generally, no. I think that leagues are often worried that someone will have something inflammatory, again, because we have the distinction between general public observers and official league observers. We do get to know someone and see what their reports are like and watch some meetings with them to see whether they're really interested in like the league's idea of speaking with one voice, or that we use positions to justify advocacy, or that our role is really as an observer, not as the advocacy committee. So that if someone seems to have a strong advocacy bent, we can encourage them to go join the advocacy committee. Or if there's someone who really has strong opinions, that's the point of observing a government meeting. If you're a member of the public, you should probably have opinions. So we're not trying to censor those out. Our standard isn't that people need to have journalistic, impartiality. We want people to have thoughts. Now, if they put them in a way that's offensive or perhaps incorrect, that's when we have that feedback opportunity where we say to the person, we get what you're trying to say here, but is this an error? Is there a way that you could say this that's maybe less inflammatory? And that rarely happens. I mean, Jen, have you had any issues with giving people feedback on their reports?
Nothing super noticeable. I just try to make sure that people are not bringing in like very subjective opinions into the reports, and making sure that they know the reports tend to be or should be a little bit more objective, and considering like everyone in the community that might not be able to observe these meetings. I actually just looked over a recent report, and this person brought up a lot of really great points about the downfall or the pitfalls of digital media when having public meetings, and why those things like don't work for her and probably don't work for other people who may be observing. So in general, I think people tend to be pretty good about what they're writing, and I think having a very short report keeps people on the right track for what they're writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the only times that I feel like the league standard and the public standard has really gotten out of alignment has actually been when we've gone to do trainings for community groups. So again, because we mostly want to train the public, we have gone to groups. We've done some panels with the ACLU. We've had meetings with the Coalition on Homelessness here, and we were regularly every month going to the Showing Up for Racial Justice new member orientation. And Showing Up for Racial Justice, often called SURGE, is a group that encourages white people to get involved in anti-racism for themselves and for their communities. And so this first meeting was generally people who were not as involved with SURGE or maybe had been involved in the past and were coming back to it. So we were at one meeting where we presented about the Observer Corps, and we showed them the FAQ that we have, which I brought up at the very beginning of the training. Let me bring that up again. So this FAQ, we took what the police say their job is and how the public is supposed to have oversight. And a woman who was there said, you know, I couldn't bring this flyer in my house. If my family, if my roommates saw something this pro-police, they would really question my values, and you know, that this would be evil to them, essentially. And what we had to explain was that, you know, I understand that, and that this flyer is not necessarily for people who have experience with police, who particularly have experience with negative policing, that this flyer really was designed for people who don't know what the police do or have fairly positive assumptions about the San Francisco police saying that they're going to do something and then doing it. And I'm not bashing the police. There have been numerous studies saying that the San Francisco police had profound issues. They still do. There are 272 recommendations. They were going to be under consent decree. They have not addressed even half of the explicit concerns that they were required to address by the Department of Justice. So saying that the police had this stated job and needed the public to hold them accountable to it is not controversial. It's not, you know, having an opinion that's doesn't have any basis. There's a lot of documentation in San Francisco, in particular around problems with bias and use of force. So this flyer, however, is pretty even keel. The only time that we really talk about there being issues is at the bottom of the back of it, where we say that there's the current status is that in 2016, there was this review, there's 272 recommendations, and 2 of the 5 main areas are use of force and bias. So it has been helpful for the San Francisco League to get that criticism back, that the people who are most negatively impacted by policing in San Francisco do not like the flyer that we are using. When we explained that our goal is to try and draw people into policing reform who maybe didn't realize that there's such a big problem with the SFPD, that there's such a long history of problems with the SFPD, that there was already these investigations going back to 2016, but even before then, that often the people who maybe haven't engaged around policing need a flyer like this and need to go to a meeting and sit quietly and just watch what's happening and hear the public comment and see how the process is or isn't working, and hear the reports from the California Department of Justice and from the Department of Police Accountability, so that they really understand that their lack of experience with police or their generally positive experience with police is not the experience of the people who most often have to deal with the police. So I think that has really been where the toughest conversations have been. They have not been between observers or members of the public filing their reports and wanting to be observers. It's been when we actually go out and do these trainings and show the materials that we have. Jen, would you say that that's been true for you too? Have those been some of the most difficult decisions and management kind of conflicts for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we definitely tout being objective and trying to stay neutral as an observer, and trying to do that myself is very difficult because I personally like have a very strong progressive stance, and so I often want to speak out about things in ways that potentially could be harmful. And so trying to tamper that down, I think, has been, you know, it's taken practice, and it's like a practice in meditation in some ways, where you're just sitting and listening, which is also a good practice for empathy. And that's something that we're trying to push, I think, with the Observer Court as well.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I like the idea of describing it as empathy. So our trainings, usually we try to keep them to about half an hour, and then we, are observing meetings, and it can go a little longer if people are having discussion. With this larger group, I don't really want to unmute everybody because I think that'll be a little bit chaotic. Jen, do you have any thoughts for, anything that we may have missed or that we should make sure that we cover?
Nothing off the top of my head.
I'm realizing for the people in San Francisco, the next step that we would take at the end of the training is we would pick a meeting with you. So one that you were already planning on going to, one that you would be interested in going to. In particular, we try to find meetings that other people are going to so that you could meet other observers and kind of have a buddy or two while you go. So right now, the Police Commission is really one of the top meetings that we're going to on a regular basis. So we get together every Wednesday night around 5:30, and we have a Signal group that we all join. A number of us also tweet. And so we watch the meeting together, and many of us will leave for an hour or two and go have dinner and then come back. And lately the meeting is still going on. I hope that the meetings get shorter soon. But for the folks in San Francisco, we would love to have you participate for the next Police Commission meeting. And I can't remember, Jen, are they having one next week or are they taking a week off?
I believe they're having one next week, but I'll double check right now.
Yeah, I think that they are having one next week. So if you're in San Francisco and you would like to participate with us, one of the links that will be in our follow-up email is to our San Francisco Policing Google group. So back in the days of when we had lots of in-person meetings because of all the district meetings, people would post to the Google group, hey, I'm going to the Bayview district meeting on Tuesday. Hey, I'm going to the Central district meeting on Wednesday. And that way people could meet up. We don't really do that now because there aren't district meetings, but we usually post, hey, a bunch of us are going to be watching on Wednesday night. Has anybody looked at the agenda? Are there any news articles that you want to look at? And occasionally we hear about other meetings. So for example, there have been a lot of resolutions, budget discussions, things going on with the Board of Supervisors. The Office for Neighborhood Safety has had some meetings. So occasionally people will send out links saying, hey, there's a meeting on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Who has time to watch that then? And some of us will watch it together. So joining that Google group is part of how we keep track of who's doing what. Back when things were busier, Jen Wong and I kept a spreadsheet of all of the dates and who was kind of generally going to them and sending out reminders to people. But since the only regular meeting now is the Wednesday Police Commission meeting, we're basically just using the Google group to coordinate what we're all up to. And you don't have to become an official observer. You don't have to become a league member. But we would love to have you talk about observing, and it's a lot more fun to do it with other people. And usually we would also have observed a meeting together, so we would spend part of this training filing our first observer report. So we would encourage people to go to the web form and fill in the information. And so we could all talk together about, well, what did you think about this part of the meeting or that part of the meeting? And even that early on, Jen Wong and I would be able to get a sense of people. So as they fill out their form, do they seem nervous? Can we provide them with encouragement? What seems to be holding them up? Are they someone who's putting in a ton of detail? If they're putting in a lot of detail, they might not be able to maintain that if they're going to meetings over time. The number one problem is people deciding to put too much in their report, and then they get intimidated and they never file a report again. I'm definitely guilty of that. I often have to catch up on my reports because I spend so much time live tweeting them that I don't ever fill out the form. So Jen has done a good job of reminding me to fill it in. But that part of our training is pretty important, getting people committed to the next meeting and getting them to file a report so that they aren't intimidated by it. They've done it once before when they go in to do it. Jen, if there's anything else you want to add or particular questions or comments from people?
I think maybe just one note about the Facebook group also.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, so there is, for League of Women Voters members, there is an Observer Corps Facebook group, and I'm not logged into Facebook right now, so I can't show it to you, but that will be in the follow-up as well. San Francisco has a Google group just for local folks. Nationwide, there's an Observer Corps group. And so there's about 90 different people who belong to that Facebook group. And so they share ideas and resources and training materials and discuss how they run their Observer Corps. And most of the Observer Corps in the US are not focused on policing. San Francisco's is very focused on that. We do have other people who go to other meetings. Jen just went to the Sunshine Task Force meeting the other day. We've had someone who was very interested in land use and planning, so we trained her and she started doing that. We don't restrict people to do policing, but if you join the Facebook group, you get to see all of the different meetings that different people observe. And that's everything from different topic areas to different motivations. An example that we often cite is the North and Central San Mateo County. They had an Observer Corps that really focused on language access. So their observers were looking to see, are the notices in Spanish? Are the materials in Spanish? Is there live Spanish translation? So that was something we've never even considered doing, but it was really interesting to know that their Observer Corps was just looking at access. So you might think, well, are they doing things, in Russian? Are they doing it in Mandarin? Are they doing it with an ASL interpreter? So I thought that was really neat that their Observer Corps had a totally different set of values and questions. All right, well, we will send a follow-up email to everyone. It'll have links to documents and Facebook groups and Google groups and the national handbook on doing an Observer Corps. We also have a local event coming up that's going to be online, an interview with the Department of Police Accountability. So that's our next event on July 28th. We'll probably also host additional Observer Corps trainings. And if your league or your community group, it doesn't have to even be league, wants an observer training, we're happy to do custom ones. Those are usually our most fun ones. And Jen, maybe you can say something about some of the custom trainings that you've done as just a last thing before we go.
Sure. The most recent one I did was actually for my partner's company. And that was really great because it's getting a lot of like privileged tech people into the conversation and kind of pushing them to use their privilege for good and for more of the community. So that was pretty exciting. They're all very receptive and all very fired up, and they've been observing a lot of meetings, and we have a bunch of chatter going on in a Slack. So that's been really cool. And people tend to be much more open with a community that they already know. So that's also really makes it more fun, I think.
Yeah, inviting a book group or a bunch of neighbors, things, coworkers. I think it's a great idea. Well, I don't want to run over time. So everyone, that's the end of the training, and we'll be sending a follow-up email. Thanks so much for participating, everybody. Good night.